Now, I love watching documentaries about unsolved cases. It's actually a lot of fun for me to guess what happened, but obviously it is not fun for the people involved and their families who never got any closure. Even watching them for me is a 50-50. Half of me is thoroughly intrigued and the other half is worried about sleeping alone at night and that same exact thing happening to me. Most of the cases we usually talk about occur in the US, so I'm actually really excited that this one is all about Canadian mysteries, since Top 10 is obviously based in Toronto. Represent. What is up, you guys? Hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hasan and welcome back to another video. Let's just dive straight into this one today. These are the top 10 scary, true, unsolved mysteries from Canada. Starting us off at number 10 is Julia Johnson. Back in April of 1925, at around 2 p.m. in the afternoon, 5-year-old Julia Johnson was seen by the blacksmith across the street playing alone outside her house in Winnipeg. At 3:50 p.m, Julia's neighbor Pauline Krall had a conversation with her, and that was the last time anyone saw or spoke to Julia. 5 minutes after the conversation, Pauline's son came home and told his mum that Julia's mum was looking for her, and within 20 minutes a search party was sent out looking for the child. Julia was a shy girl that wouldn't venture far from home for no reason. The adults had no clue how she could have disappeared within that 5-minute window. Extensive searches were underway, but Julia was never found. 9 years later, when a building near the family home was being repurposed, a machinist was dismantling a boiler in the basement. Inside the boiler, he found the mummified body of Julia Johnson. There was no evidence left, none to the point the coroner had no idea whether it was a murder or just an accident. Police then tried to think of who would have had access to the building at that time, and building manager John Goodwin claimed he left the key at the blacksmith's shop, but both blacksmiths denied this. Someone was lying, we just don't know who it was. Was it John Goodwin or was it the blacksmiths? Coming in at number 9 is the Highway of Tears. This entire mystery revolves around 725 kilometers of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia. From 1970 till now, there have been a string of murders at this location, and its name was coined in 1998. The RCMP Project EPANA claimed there are less than 18 victims, but Indigenous organizations don't believe that. Because such a high number of victims were First Nations women, they claim the victim numbers go as high as 40 and that these women were just abducted off the highway. Reasons behind the murders are endless. Some point to poverty and drug abuse, others say they're due to systemic racism, and others claim hitchhikers are targeted because their location is so remote and isolated. Of all the cases, only one has ever been solved. Cody Legibokov killed 3 women and a teenage girl in the Highway of Tears area and was later convicted. But that's the culprit of 4 of those murders? What about the other 36 that still go unsolved? At number 8, we have Christine JESSOP. And this one may go down in history as one of Canada's most infamous cold cases. Back in October of 1984, 9-year-old Christine JESSOP got dropped by the school bus outside her home in Queensville, Ontario. Christine was alone since her parents were at work at the time, but she somehow disappeared. Her body was found 2 months later in a wooded area more than 50 kilometers away from her home. Autopsy results showed she had been raped before being stabbed to death, and in a rush to arrest someone for the horrendous crime, suspicion fell on the JESSOP's next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Morin, who was quickly arrested and convicted of Christine's murder. I hate cases like that when you're so in a rush to arrest somebody that you just arrest the first person you think of, which is usually always false. Guy literally had a solid alibi. He was at work and his timestamp even proved it. It was impossible he had kidnapped her, but he was still arrested. It took 11 years for him to be exonerated after an inquiry report said the evidence in the case had been tailored to suit the police's theory of Guy killing her. The police even bullied a witness about her timeline. They even left cigarette butts by the house since Guy was a smoker. All that while, the real killer was still at large. He was reinvestigated and found guilty in 1992, but was finally freed in 1995 when the DNA test proved he wasn't a match. Imagine being in jail for that bloody long, wrongfully. And so many people are. So many people are. Filling at number 7 slot are the babes in the woods. That term is frequently used to describe a case with multiple child victims discovered in the forest, which is exactly what this case is. Back in 1953, the bodies of 2 young boys were found in Stanley Park, Vancouver. The corpses were so badly decomposed that on initial observation, the medical examiner thought one of the victims was a girl. Further examination led the team to conclude that the victims had been dead for 6 years already. It took till until 1998 for DNA testing to prove that both victims were in fact boys and brothers, but till this day they've remained unidentified. All officers knew about the case was that they were both killed with a hatchet, one was 10 and the other was 7, and both seemed to be Caucasian. Police started looking for mothers who were missing their children, and they were tipped off about a redhead with 2 kids who had been taken by loggers a few years prior. The case stayed cold till 2018 when detectives decided to use DNA sites like 23andMe and Ancestry to try and identify the boys. Currently though, there is still no identification. Now at number 6 is Dino Bravo. Adolfo Bresciano was an Italian immigrant living in Quebec. His day job was being the professional wrestler Dino Bravo, and I don't know how much you guys know about wrestling because I honestly don't know a lot, but Dino was named Canada's strongest man by the World Wrestling Federation in the 80s, so I mean, huge flex. He ended up retiring in 1992, and less than a year later, in March of 93, his body was found shot to death. Dino was found sitting at home filled with 17 bullets, and no one could figure out who was behind the seemingly random murder. Rumors started floating that the mafia killed Dino for his involvement in a cigarette smuggling ring. Dino was related to Vic Catroni, who was a mobster, and he used his fame to secure connections in the underworld. As he progressed, he became responsible for bigger projects, one of which was a shipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The shipment was apprehended by police, which led to people thinking his death was mob retaliation. Even one of Dino's previous opponents, Bret Hart, said Dino told them he knew his days were numbered. So maybe he was just a hit in the mob's many hits? Who knows? Coming in at number 5 is KERRIE Ann Brown. This case is the most infamous case coming out of the province of Manitoba, so let's explore it. 15-year-old KERRIE was at a party with her best friend Nicole on the 16th of October 1986. The two were waiting outside the house about to leave when Nicole went inside to grab something she had forgotten. By the time she came back outside, KERRIE had disappeared. All Nicole could see was a single set of footprints walking in the snow. The situation freaked her out even more so since KERRIE was meant to sleep at her house that night, so what was she going to tell KERRIE's parents? Her father reported her missing at 4 p.m. the next day, and less than 40 hours after she was last seen, her dead body was found in a wooded area outside her hometown, Thompson. Autopsy results showed that KERRIE had been raped before being killed, and DNA tests concluded that 2 people were involved. A local man was charged with the crime but was let go a few months later due to lack of evidence. Until this day, the case remains unsolved. At number 4 is Kimberly Ann McAndrew. Back in August of 1989, 19-year-old Kimberly McAndrew, a student at Dalhousie University, left her shift at Canadian Tire a few minutes early. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. She had plans that night to go to the Halifax Busker Festival with her family and boyfriend, but obviously she never showed up. A witness reported seeing her buying flowers at Penhall Mall in Dartmouth, but Tom Martin, the police detective on the case, highly doubted that. See, if you don't know the layout of Halifax, Halifax is here and Dartmouth is like here, and you can either take McDonald Bridge to get there or a ferry. They're not super close and it's a bit of a mission to get to Dartmouth, and the only reason I know this is because my ex went to Dalhousie and I visited him a lot. Either way, anyone, including Kim, would have never made the trip to Dartmouth considering she had plans that evening, so Martin suspected that whatever happened to her happened in the Canadian Tire parking lot, and I do agree with Martin. To this day, neither her or her body have ever been found. I just don't understand why you'd go to Dartmouth to buy flowers and you can buy flowers in Halifax. Filling at number 3 slot is Lynne Harper. Back in July of 1957, 12-year-old Lynne Harper and her family had relocated to Clinton, Ontario since her dad had recently joined the military. In June of 1959, Lynne went missing near RCAF station and her body was found 2 days later at a farm nearby. Police officers automatically turned to Lynne's 14-year-old school friend Stephen Truscott since he was the last person who saw Lynne alive. That evening, Stephen gave her a ride on his bike from school towards County Road. No one has any idea what took place on that bike ride, but officers assumed that when the two reached Lawson's Bush, Stephen raped and then killed her. According to Stephen, though, he had left her at the intersection of County Road and Highway 8, and the next time he looked back, he saw her getting into some random Chevrolet. Despite his account, he was charged and tried as an adult, first being sentenced to death and then just to life in prison. He was paroled 10 years later and was acquitted of all charges in 2007 after a major miscarriage of justice. Lynne's real abductor and killer remains unknown, but imagine how stupid you have to be to focus all your attention on a 14-year-old boy when there are other viable suspects in Clinton. Now, at number 2 are the Hemlock Valley murders. Back in 1995, the bodies of 3 women were found near the Agassiz Mountains in Vancouver. The victims, Tammy Pipe, Victoria Yanker, and Tracy Olajide, were all prostitutes in their 30s working in downtown Vancouver. So already we know the killer had a preference in who they liked to target: prostitutes in their 30s. All 3 were assaulted and then murdered before being left near the mountains, and thankfully with this case, officers kind of already knew who the culprit was: Ronald Richard McCauley. Ronald had a history of assaulting prostitutes and had already served 17 years for 2 rapes and attempted murders. He was imprisoned again shortly after the bodies were found, but there was no way to link him to the crimes. The semen samples from the crime scene were too degraded, but thankfully as forensic technology improved, they were able to test his sample in 2001. It wasn't a match. So after relying on the killer being in jail all those years, the police got a huge wake-up call when they realized the case was still ongoing. I hate cases involving prostitutes because prostitute cases are the ones that police least look into, because I don't know why, maybe they're just a lower demographic of the population, but they are still as important as any part of the population. Look into those cases. And finally, at number 1 is Louis Sam. Back in 1884, an American mob crossed over the border from Nooksack, USA to Abbotsford, Canada, and lynched 14-year-old Sam. The boy was accused of murdering a shopkeeper in Nooksack called James Bell, and when he returned to Abbotsford, his people, the present-day Sumas First Nation people, turned him over to BC authorities because they figured they would know how to deal with the matter. While Sam was awaiting his trial, the angry mob captured him and hanged him from a tree near the border. After investigation, it became extremely clear that Sam did not kill James Bell and that the 2 men who riled up the mob in the first place were the most likely culprits. 2 BC officers went to Nooksack in disguise to collect information, and they found out that the murderer was most likely William Osterman. William had taken over Bell's business and was the one who brought over Sam, promising him a job, which was a complete lie. His sidekick and brother-in-law David Harkness, who was also sleeping with Bell's wife, was the ringleader of the mob. The 2 went unconvicted, and a young person of color died for no reason other than the fact he was a person of color. I wanted to make this case number 1 because it hit home with me for some reason, what with the recent murder of George Floyd. I just can't stand another day or hearing about another case where a person of color is killed by a white person for no reason. And that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like a part 2, do let me know. Canada is filled with unsolved mysteries. But yeah, as always, I have been your host, Ayman Hasan, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.